Okay, very good. Nice to see a lot of people here this morning. It's very good to see everybody's sort of braving the overcast and cold weather and everything. Nice to come out. So I'm going to talk today about something. Hopefully there's no beginners in the room, because I'm going to talk about a pretty heavy topic. I'm going to talk about something that you might leave here going, what did he talk about? That made no sense. So just bear with me. Most of the time I don't really know what I'm talking about, so we're all in this confusion together. But I'm just here saying something about it. So the thing I wanted to talk about this morning is I first wanted to get you just to reflect on some things in your life, and just reflect on what it is that you actually truly value in your life. What are the things that actually mean something to you? These might be things like your family. These might be things like your friends. It could be your experience of feeling religion. It could be your job or your hobbies or something like that. And so for us, these things that we value the most and give us the most meaning, if we examine these things, we have to ask ourselves, do we really own these things? Do we really have these things? These things that are the most important thing to us in life, do we actually ever really have them? Obviously, Buddhism teaches that everything that we experience is impermanent. Everything that we experience is not self. So if these things that we value the most come under that, what does that leave us? These things that are so important to us are simply impermanent and not self. What does that leave us with? What do we actually ever truly have? And I think there is only a few things that we ever truly possess and that we ever truly have, and that can't ever really be taken away from us. And I'd say what those three things actually are is our conscious experience of the world, what we're attending to in our conscious experience, and the time that our conscious experience is basically online. So we only really, I think we only ever really truly have these three things of consciousness, attention, and time. We don't really have anything else. And so if we only really have these three things, what are we going to do about that? How do we actually use these things well? What actually are these things? So this is what I'm going to try to talk about today, and try to go through, and hopefully not get too lost in the process of talking about that. So I'll talk about what I actually think the issue is here that most of us face. I'll also talk about what I think consciousness, attention, and time actually are. And I'll just caveat this by starting off that there are so many more brilliant people than me that have thought about this in greater depth and with greater insight than me. So this is just me sort of thinking things up and trying to examine my own experience and trying to explain consciousness, attention, and time from an experiential perspective. Rather than a metaphysical or theoretical perspective. There's so many other more interesting and brilliant people than me that have talked about that, so I encourage you to go out and look at some of these things and not take what I say as gospel or the actual way these things are. It's just my interpretation of these things and what I experience of it. So I'll try to explain what I mean by these three things of consciousness, attention, and time. And then, in essence, what we actually do with that knowledge, that we only really actually truly have these things, or at least why I think these are the only things that you actually ever have. Now, so what's the issue that most of us face in life? What's the existential problem that we all actually face within life, that we have experienced? I think the issue here is that whatever we experience as our conscious experience, this is what shapes the world for us. This is our experience of reality. And so the quality of the life that we actually have is really determined by how our conscious experience is. And what is determining how our conscious experience is being determined by what we're paying attention to within that conscious experience. And essentially what we're spending our time attending to, this is determining the quality of the actual life that we have. And so I think the issue comes about is that most of the time we're attending to so many things that don't bring us any kind of happiness. We're attending to a lot of things that bring us some kind of suffering. And I think the main issue is that all the suffering and all the freedom that we will ever experience only ever arises in this place of our own experience, our own conscious experience. And essentially that our attention is getting dragged around to all these different things, and we're spending our time on all these different things, and this is what is shaping our experience of the world, and what we're actually experiencing through our attention and the time that we're actually spending on things. This is what we take to be reality. We take this to be true. We take this to be real. But in actuality, what we're attending to and what we perceive and what we consciously are aware of, this really is a perception. This is the way that we're just interpreting the world. And so most of the time we just get lost in this. Our attention just goes all over the place, and we spend our time on all these useless things, or we spend our time attending to things that really seem like they matter to us, and we just forget that this is transient. This is something that comes and goes. And we just get lost in that, and we just get flitted around by that. So, as I said, what we attend to and what we spend our time doing really actually becomes our reality. And we take this as reality, and we can't be convinced otherwise. If somebody else says to you, no, that's not how reality is, you say, no, I know how reality is because this is what I experience. Nobody else can tell us otherwise. And so we can't actually ever experience anything outside our own conscious experience. This is all we have. If we don't have this thing, then we don't have anything. So we can never experience the consciousness of somebody else, or we can't experience anything outside of our own consciousness. Once we experience the consciousness of being something else, you're not this thing anymore. You're something else. There's, obviously there's these movies of like people that switch bodies or whatever it is. It's like, but that's just impossible. It's, once you inhibit this being, you become that being. You are that consciousness now. You're not this consciousness anymore. So really, as I said, what we're attending to, this is building our reality. So if we're attending to things in the world that are negative, we're attending to negative thoughts, we're attending to things that are problematic in the world, then our conscious experience is going to be negative, and there's going to be suffering within it. If we're attending to more positive things in the world, then obviously our conscious experience is actually going to be more positive. So in essence, I think, that's the main sort of issue that we face, is that all we really have is this consciousness. And our attention just keeps moving around in consciousness, and what we're actually attending to and what we're spending our time attending to, this is what is filtering our experience of suffering or freedom. So before I just keep sort of rambling on about this, well, what do I mean by these three things of consciousness, attention, and time? And as I said, there's many more brilliant people than me that have talked about this, but this is at least how I understand these things. So I'll start with consciousness. The way I think consciousness actually is the experience of existing. Consciousness is the experience that that the lights are on, that you experience something, you're awake, you're alive. It's the experience of life itself. Everything that we have, everything that we have ever experienced is only experienced within our conscious experience. We can't experience anything anywhere else. This is the only place that this arises. Now, all we actually experience is filtered through this consciousness. And so what we experience at any point in time, at the moment you might be experiencing reality, or at the moment you might be in a dream, or at the moment you might be experiencing some kind of simulation, or you're in some kind of experiencing machine. You don't really know what that is. But you do know that you're having an experience. So this means you exist. Whatever reality is, you exist. So without this, there is nothing. Without this thing being online, there is nothing. Without the lights being on, you're just not here. And so everything that we've ever experienced is experienced within this. Everything you love, everything you hate, everything you've seen, everything you've felt, everything you've thought of, everything you've heard, all this is experienced in this one place, in your conscious experience. And why do I say that this is the only thing we have? Well, when this is gone, you don't have anything. There's nothing. And so why do we have this and not have all these other things in the world? Well, try to not be conscious right now. You just can't do it. You're conscious. That's the nature of this thing. You can't not be conscious. And if you're not conscious, you're not here. So the analogy I like to give with these things, anybody that has had surgery before and they may have been under anesthesia, some people are scared of it. I love it. I love anesthesia. I think it's the coolest thing ever. This experience of I'm here, I'm online, and then all of a sudden it's just gone, and then it's back, and it's later. It's so cool. So this experience of being online, this is what consciousness actually is. And when that thing goes, then you go. Some people are scared of this, but this also happens to us every night. We go to sleep. This thing goes off. Obviously, we're picking up signals and things like this, but essentially it's gone. So when that thing goes, you go. Now, the scary thing about this to some people is that this consciousness that we actually have, it's only here for a sliver of time. It's only online for just a momentary instant. There's been billions and billions and billions of years that this consciousness that you're experiencing now has not been online. And it's only here for a really, really short time. And there's going to be billions and billions and billions of years after this. Consciousness goes offline. So it's only here for this really short instant. And the even more urgent kind of thing is that you only ever experience consciousness moment to moment. It's never this elongated kind of, my whole life is a conscious experience. It's only ever moment to moment to moment to moment. And it's so miraculous that this happens. It's such a mystery. How does this thing happen? How does, I have this body here, and how is consciousness coming out of this? This is the greatest mystery that we face. How are we actually conscious? It's mind-blowing. So a lot of what I'm describing here, if you're thinking about it in the Buddhist sense, you might be thinking, well, is he talking about the 6 sense bases, the consciousness of the 6 sense bases? And I wouldn't really say that I'm getting at that. What I'm probably more getting at is, if you're thinking at it more in terms of a Buddhist perspective, is the vijnana in the link of dependent origination, the third link in the chain of dependent origination, the arising of consciousness. And from the arising of consciousness comes nama rupa, which comes body and form and mental objects. So more what I'm thinking about with consciousness here is vijnana in that kind of sense, as opposed to the vijnana of the 6 sense bases. A lot of us might think as well, this consciousness, this is the thing that is a sense of self. This is the me. Because this thing is online now, that this is me, this is a self. And actually, I wouldn't really, I don't think that that's the way it sort of works. Consciousness has to be there before this sense of self comes online. You have to have consciousness as the background for a sense of self to arise. And what I think a sense of self is, it's actually wrapped up with more, the second thing that I talked about is attention. Usually what we're attending to, I think that's more wrapped up with this sense of self, because we usually attend to different things and we think, I'm seeing something, I'm hearing something, I'm thinking something. But in essence, I think what we're doing there is we're attending to these different things, and this is what we feel like is a sense of self. This attention. And so we can ask ourselves now and take a look at it as like, well, what actually is attention? You're attending to something now. Maybe you're attending to my talk. You're attending to the sounds in the room. How is that working? Are you doing something? Are you controlling your attention? Or is it just sort of happening? Is attention to things just happening in some, again, mind-blowingly mysterious way? So we usually think there is an owner of this attention. Again, I see something, I hear something. But where is attention located when we look at it? It feels like it's sort of located somewhere in the middle of consciousness, and this middle of consciousness is the thing that I take to be a self. And so, but the more we look at it, we just start to realize that, no, this is just attention, flickering back and forth. And so one thing you might think of is that, well, actually, is attention consciousness? And this is a common misperception, that attention is consciousness, because we think because we're aware of something that this is consciousness. But there is a difference there. Attention is something that works within consciousness. It attends to different things. What you're conscious of in any one point, any one moment, is massive. There's so many things going on, but what you attend to is very limited. So the idea here is, say for example now, again, you're conscious of all these different things, but you're not conscious of how your armpit feels at the moment. But as soon as I say you're not conscious of your armpit, your attention flicks to your armpit. Okay, no, yeah, I know what my armpit, but you weren't like that before. And again, so how did that happen? How did attention move that way? It's insane. I don't know how it works. It just amazes me every time that it actually happens. So the analogy here is consciousness and attention are different. It's like consciousness is more like this massive field, but attention is more like a spotlight that moves around in the field. And the way we can sort of think about this, and we can actually know this in another way, is there's something called the cocktail party effect, which is like really cool if you've ever noticed it. What the cocktail party effect is like you might notice it if you have some lunch here and everybody's talking and everybody's happy and you're eating some lunch and you're talking to a friend and you're tuning everything else out. You've tuned out everything that's happening around you. Then all of a sudden, you're really involved in this conversation. Then all of a sudden, you hear your name. Somebody says your name in the background, and what? How do you like click on and hear your name? Somebody said it like all the way over there. Our attention goes to that. So we're conscious of all these things, but we're just not attending to them. So again, our attention is a thing that actually moves around and keeps moving around within our conscious experience. And this is the thing that pays attention to things where there might be some sort of pain or some sort of suffering, or it might be paying attention to aspects of our experience that are more beneficial and they're contributing a little bit more to our well-being. Now, I actually think that we have very, very limited control over our attention. I'd even probably go so far as to say that we don't have control over our attention. Now, again, what I mean by this is that anybody that's tried to meditate for a period of time, and anyone that's tried to keep their attention on something, we think, I'm going to keep my attention on this thing. Does it ever work? You put your attention on something and all of a sudden it just drifts away. How does it drift away? I don't know. I don't control this thing. There's times where you can collate it a little bit to like stay on something. But again, you don't really control this thing. You can build habits. You can build like a habit with it, but I don't think you ever really control it. And again, try to not pay attention now. You have to be attending to something. It's just happening. You're like, what? How do I not pay attention? You're paying attention to your thoughts. So attention is always there. You can't switch this thing off either. You always have to be attending to something. Even when you're in your most relaxed and dullest and switched off state, you're still attending to something. You might be attending to the TV or something, I don't know. But we're always actually attending to something. We can't turn attention off, so we can't actually control it. Nor can we keep it usually on something. So this is why I say I don't really think we have too much control over our attention, and this is scary. Because what we're attending to is, as I said, this is determining the quality of our lives. What we're attending to, if we're attending to things that cause us suffering, this is making us suffer. If we're attending to things that cause us happiness, this is we're happy. So we're just being thrown around by this thing. So really, it's scary to think about. Think about this. It's, if you pay attention to something like a pain in your leg, your existence becomes pain. If you pay attention to the beauty of nature, your existence becomes one of beauty. And you don't really control that. It's terrifying, terrifying sometimes. Now, I'll get on to the next aspect of time, and I think time and attention are really interconnected. How we spend our time and how we experience time is so tied up with what we're attending to. If we don't attend to anything, then the feeling of a passage of time gets mixed up in some kind of way. How we spend our time is what we spend our attention on as well. So really, think about how it is you actually experience time. Do you experience it? And most of us think, experience time is something where it's, there's millennia, there's centuries, there's years, there's months, there's days, there's hours, there's minutes, there's all these kinds of things. But think, how do you actually experience time? Do you experience it as a block? Do you experience it as a block of 80 years of being on Earth? Do you experience time as a year? Do you experience time as an hour? Do you actually experience it in that way? Or is it more just this moment-to-moment passage? Think about when you woke up this morning to now. It might be 3 hours for some of you, it might be 4, it might be a little bit more. This passage of time between just this point that you woke up and now, how do you experience that? You might think, well, yeah, it's been 3 hours. But you didn't experience it as 3 hours. You just experienced it as these kinds of moments that keep drifting on into each other. So, while we think in, years, days, minutes, hours, all these kinds of things, we never really truly experience time in this way. We only ever experience things moment to moment. These things, this time that we have, this linear concept that we have of time, it really is just a projection. It's a very useful projection. It keeps society together. It keeps us, getting up and going to work on time and all these kinds of things. It's useful, and I'm not to say that it's an illusion, but we just don't experience time this way at all. Really, you don't experience it as minutes, hours, days. All you experience it as is now. That's the only way that you experience time. It can't be any other way. So, all we have is now, and now just keeps slipping away. Just constantly and relentlessly, and you can't do anything about it. Again, this is another thing you can't control, but this is the only thing that you have. You only have time. And this time is just this instantaneous moment. And our attention on time is the only thing that we have, and our conscious experience of our attention on time is really the only thing we have. Everything else in that, on top of that, is just a manifestation within that thing. So, what you experience, becomes, what you experience is just this: consciousness, attention, and time. And what you spend your time on, that actually becomes your existence. What you spend your attention on, this becomes your experience. And so, with this now, what do we do about that? It's mind-blowing. What do I do with this now? If this is all I have, if consciousness, attention, and time is all I have, what do I do? What do I do with this thing? And I spend most of my consciousness, I spend most of my attention, and I spend most of my time thinking about this. And I don't really know. I don't really exactly know what to do with this. I'm trying to, obviously try to work the whole thing out, but it's a hard problem. It's a hard problem to get through. And so I think the thing we can at least reflect on is that we can recognize this, that this is all we really have. Consciousness, attention, and time. This is the only thing that we really have. These things I said that we value so much, these are important to us, but these are transient. These are manifestations within this experience of consciousness, attention, and time. And so if we can muster up the mindfulness to realize this and to recollect this, when we do experience these things that do have value to us and do have meaning for us, we can actually be more within these experiences. We won't take them for granted, we won't let it slip away. We really do have to try to muster up as much mindfulness and wisdom as we possibly can to remind ourselves that this is all we have. And so the opportunity for freedom is within this moment. And again, we just try to recollect this as much as possible and try to not let it slip away and also not take it for granted. We obviously spend so much of our time just going and doing things that we don't like doing, and we spend a lot of our attention on things that they're not so good. But the more we can try to recollect this, the less we will waste this precious opportunity that we actually have. The thing is that as I said before, all of the freedom and all of the suffering that we actually have, it only arises in this one place. It doesn't arise anywhere else. And so the opportunity that you have to experience freedom, it's right here. But we just keep letting this opportunity slip away from us. We just continue to let it slip away and let it slip away because we get pulled around. So as I said, we just have to muster as much mindfulness as possible to keep trying to remind ourselves of this and keep reflecting back on this. And, when we do get pulled around by our attention and we do drift into all these different things, and this ego comes online of interpreting the world in a particular kind of way and interpreting the world and perceiving it and building a reality through that, we just have to be aware, we have to try to be aware that this process is happening. And the more we can be aware that this process is happening, we won't take it as seriously anymore. We just won't take it, we won't give it as much meaning as we usually do. It's not to say that this is meaningless, but that we don't attach the kinds of meanings that we usually do to it. We can become a little bit more free of this thing. We can just see that what is happening is just attention is moving around and we're experiencing the passage of time, and this is filtering this experience of the world. And really just all that we're attending to and this feeling of a self that's within it is really just this kind of avatar that's been built on top of attention to make it feel like there's a center of existence. And the more we can recollect that, the less problematic life becomes, because we don't get caught up in the story so much. And so if we recollect on these things, that this is the only thing that we have is consciousness, attention, and time, I think also we don't take things for granted anymore. These things I talked about that I asked about at the start, what are these things that actually give you value and meaning? You don't take these for granted anymore because you realize that these things truly are transient. And these are the things that are just in my existence now, so they're important. And these are the things that are right here, right now, and I'm experiencing them, and I'm existing them. And because I exist, these things are here. And so we just don't take this for granted as much anymore. We don't take this as something that just, okay, I'm here now, so I'll play on my phone and I don't care what's happening. We become more careful with our existence because we know it slips away. We know it keeps relentlessly falling through the mists of time and that we can't hang on to it. And so we savor it much, much more. We realize this mind-blowingly precious gift that we actually have, that we exist, that consciousness actually is online because it's only there for just a moment and then it's gone. And when it's gone, it's gone. So we continue to try to remind ourselves of this, remind ourselves how precious this experience is. We continue to remind ourselves how fortunate we actually are that we actually do get to experience this thing, and we don't get as caught up into the kinds of delusions that are brought up within consciousness, attention, and time. We don't take it for granted anymore that this opportunity that we have, that this is something that we shouldn't give a lot of meaning to. The more we start to realize that the freedom that we're after, it's right here. The more we start to realize that this suffering that we have, it's right here as well, that they're both in the same place. Suffering and freedom are in this same place. They're only in this same place. They're only in this place that we experience the world. They're only in existence. They're only in our experience. They can't be anywhere else. Everything that we're looking for is right here in front of us already. The freedom that we're after, it's already here. The suffering that we have, it's here as well. We can never get freedom in some future time. We can't ever do that. We can't ever get some suffering in some future time. The only place it is here. The only place it is in our experience right now. The freedom that we want, it's only ever here. It's only ever now. It can't be anywhere else. This sense of self can only be here now in this one place. The sense of no self can only ever be in this same place that this thing arises. Suffering and freedom, they both arise in the same place. They arise in our experience of consciousness, attention, and time. So we have to remind ourselves of this as much as we possibly can. And the more we remind ourselves of this, the more we, as I said, the more we don't take it for granted. The more we realize that what we're actually after, it's here, it's now. There's no need to go searching somewhere else for it. It's actually here for you right now, so don't let this opportunity drift away. So with that, I'll probably call it a day there. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I tend to confuse myself when I talk through these things, so hopefully you got something out of it, and I'm more than happy to, if anybody goes, that really didn't make sense, or that was totally wrong, I'm more than happy to hear it, because I'm probably wrong, so yeah, more than happy to hear your thoughts.
Please come up to the microphone if you have any questions. We're just going to alternate between the physical audience and the online audience. Okay, thank you.
sorry to the children that are in the room. Man, he hit you with a hard thing. Hard thing for a 10-year-old.
Thank you, Ajahn.
No problem.
Okay, so when I'm lying on the operating table
Yeah.
and I've been zonked out,
Yep.
my body is still there.
Yep.
I don't know what's happening there, but I understand sometimes people do talk and other things occur. What's happening at that point?
When you're under anesthesia or something like
Well,
that?
for you're not there, but the body is still, other people are still perceiving
Yeah.
your body as existing. As far as they're concerned, you're
You still
still
exist.
there.
Yeah.
But your consciousness is not there. And yet sometimes, of course, and I take it this probably when people are coming out of anaesthetics, but, nonetheless there is some sort of communication or something happening
Yeah.
at some stage. How would you think about that?
I still, reality. So I'm not sort of taking like a solipsistic view of reality, that reality doesn't exist outside your consciousness. I still do think reality does exist outside your consciousness. Other people can perceive reality, outside your consciousness, not being here. I wouldn't ascribe to some kind of illusionism. Wouldn't really ascribe to that. But where has your consciousness gone at that time? Obviously, the body is still physically there. There's actually more recent research coming out that even when you are actually under anesthesia, you're still actually perceiving some things. You're just not aware of it. So they do things like play music and things like this, and the brain actually reacts in ways when you're under anesthesia, like you would if you were actually hearing it. It's the same thing with something like sleep. You're still sort of perceiving the environment around you, but you're just, for all intents and purposes, your conscious experience of your existence is offline. So and so where is your consciousness at that time? I don't know. I really just don't know. I do, but as I said, I do think that reality still exists outside of that, but that for us, the reality that we experience, we can only experience for ourselves. We can only experience reality through our own consciousness. And the way that we experience that reality is really, really filtered. Does that answer the question, or did I get the question right? Or
I think that, I think that answers the question. I suppose, I suppose there's another thought in regard to the world, if you like, of transpersonal psychology.
Yeah.
And stuff that goes beyond our sort of normal perception of
Yep.
who we are.
Yep.
And what's happening out there in a bigger space.
Yeah.
And I take it that we can't really know that, and yet the fact that there's continuity, we can come back.
Yeah.
It's not that we we leave where we are, we've lost consciousness because we're subject to anaesthetic, but we come back to the same space.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know. It's absolutely miraculous. It's absolutely miraculous. The kind of transpersonal thing, I'm not very familiar with that. So can you explain that to me, or?
I really understood it.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Yeah.
found it a bit interesting in the sense that, and the best way that you can sort of think about it is to just say that you could go to some totally different thing about how certain scientific discoveries can sometimes happen simultaneously.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so it's as if there's, at some level, there's a linking of consciousness,
Yep.
and things are working at another level beyond ordinary perception.
Yep. I know. Yep. I'm not sure. I'm not sure of that. As I said, I'm trying not to make some kind of metaphysical claim here. I'm only sort of really talking about the way that we experience consciousness, at least the way I sort of experience this consciousness. So I don't really know anything outside of that. Is is it possible? Yeah, those things are possible, but I just don't know. So the aspect of, well, is there some kind of shared consciousness that transmutes across cultures and with technological advances or something happening at the same kind of time? I don't really know. I don't really know about those things. I can imagine though that any sort of society getting to a particular kind of period of evolution might sort of start to have the same, develop the same kinds of things. Also, we're very, humans, we're hardwired very, very similarly, where we detect patterns very similarly as well. So I don't think it's so surprising that we see across different cultures things like art, things like technology, producing something very, very similar, because we do recognize patterns, and we do recognize patterns in the world very, very similarly. So, but that's not a perfect explanation for these things. It might be something above and beyond, but I don't really know. As I said, all I can really know is what I consciously experience. So I can't really speak too much above and beyond that. So yeah, sorry, couldn't answer the question, but good question. Yeah.
Do you want me to use that?
You can either use that or I'll just repeat it, one or the other.
So you were saying that, okay, with all that attention in your consciousness,
Yep.
that you don't have control.
Mm.
But, so like when you were describing like, okay, there's only right now in time, like that really clicked, right? And then I experienced like, okay, there's only right now. But obviously it's very difficult, like generally.
Yeah.
But when you say there's no control, do you find that because you're meditating regularly, that gives you that ability to train and control? Or are you saying, are you experiencing that now because you meditate more, or because, do you know what I'm saying? Or because you're conceptualizing it?
Yeah.
Or is that the point of meditation, to get you to that there is just now? Like,
in a
I'm
way,
not there yet.
in a way, yeah.
Okay.
Trying to, in a way, sort of nudge your attention to now. That what is appearing is now, as opposed to your attention just staying on one thing. Like, can we keep our attention on one thing? Yeah, sort of, but I think it's more the attention that you develop through meditation. This is more like a habit pattern of attention. You can't really control it forever. There's a point where it can be sort of modulated a particular kind of way to something in the present, to pay more attention to the present. But that attention will flick and move away from the present. So in essence, I think you're right. What you're trying to do when you're practicing meditation and you're training in meditation is trying to sort of some way shift this attention on to the present. But again, it's not really something that you have full control over at all, because at some point it's going to wander off. At some point it's going to sort of stay, and it's going to sort of go away. So you don't really have control in that kind of way. So yeah, I think in some level you're right. That's in essence what you're attempting to do with meditation, is to actually modulate your attention in a way that you actually experience the present time. And above and beyond that, there isn't anything else. And if you can do that, again, you sink into experience, you sink into the now. And that's what you're trying to actually do with something like meditation. And and it is something that obviously it's hard to do. I gave like a half an hour talk of all these things. It's like, I don't do it all the time. I practice meditation, but I get as lost as everybody else. I get as lost, I get as deluded, I get as wrapped up in the world as everybody else. But it's those moments that you can pull it back. That somehow things just come together and you actually realize this thing again. That this is actually the sort of uniqueness of it. This is the miracle of it. And so I think, that's in a way what you're trying to do, but you don't always do it well. And some people are better at it than others. Some people might be able to stay in that for longer periods of time. But I don't think we should be disheartened by that in any way. If you can get it for a moment, it's miraculous. That's it, that's experience. If you can get that, so many people they go through their whole lives and never experience it. It just, they drift the whole life. So even just clicking onto that for a moment it's the most profound thing that you can ever do. And so if through some sort of miracle you can continue to keep trying to drop into that, that's really what you're trying to do. So hopefully that answers the question. Can you repeat that again, please? Yeah. We don't control anything. We don't control consciousness, attention, time. We don't control the sound.
So what happens to your attention with depression when your interest in what you used to be interested in is lost and engagement is lessened?
Okay. It's with something like depression, and you have these experiences of anhedonia, where you've lost the pleasure of existence. In essence, what's happening with your attention at that time is I think I don't know for sure. I think in essence it's sort of, you're still attending to something, but you're attending to the kind of dollar aspects of life. And this might be wrong. I'm not really sure. Usually, when we experience something pleasurable, we can shift our attention to something that brings joy, that brings well-being, that brings happiness, that brings fulfillment. But if our attention is moving to these things that don't bring pleasure, and we're interpreting it in a particular kind of way, then our attention has moved more to the negative side of things. And that's why I said where your attention ends up going, this is what gives you the experience of suffering, or this is what gives you the experience of freedom or happiness. Now, because attention is almost impossible to control, this is hard to get out of. This is, if you are experiencing this kind of anhedonia, then it's really hard to actually pull yourself out of that. And so, we just have to sort of try to move our attention more to things that actually do give us some kind of pleasure. Essentially, I think, again, I don't know, that it seems like the attention is moving on to the negative aspects of things, and this is now what you're attending to this thing that used to give you pleasure, and it doesn't give you the same kind of reactive experience. You don't interpret it in the same way that used to give you pleasure. And so now you're perceiving the world in this particular kind of way, but the world that you're perceiving is filtered. It's filtered in some way. You're interpreting it in some kind of way. You're attending to this thing, but you're interpreting it. And this is what ends up filling your conscious experience, is that things aren't pleasurable anymore. Like things are dull. Things are, things that have no more life to them or whatever. So, what do you do about that? I guess the first thing is to realize that that's what's happening in some way. That your attention is moving to the more negative sides of interpreting the stimuli that you're actually experiencing. And at least to realize that is actually happening. And to also realize that, as I said, consciousness, attention, and time, these are momentary. And so the thing that you experience as depression, this is momentary. It arises now, but in the next moment, it's gone. It has to arise again. So if we can at least try to remind ourselves of this, hopefully this can maybe help us in some way. It does, again, it's, as I said, most of us spend the majority of our time sort of lost, and it's not a good thing to be. I'm not making light of it in any way. I'm not trying to minimize it and say, well, everything's just moment to moment, so depression is not really real. No, I'm not saying that. Again, this is how we experience the world. All I'm saying is that if we can try to latch onto that and sort of see that this is a momentary thing, then hopefully that can actually give us some freedom from that. Right? Yeah.
Thank you for the talk, Bhante. Just
No
a question.
Yeah.
You've talked about basically us ordinary lay people, how we see things. Would you like to maybe try and contrast that with how an enlightened person, or how you, from the text and that, an enlightened person would be experiencing?
Yeah. Again, I don't know because I'm not enlightened, so I count myself in the normal muck of everybody else as well. So how would an enlightened being be experiencing this passage of consciousness, attention, and time? I'm assuming that a fully liberated being would actually be cognizant and aware that freedom is present in experience in the present moment. I'm assuming that somebody that is fully enlightened would realize that suffering is something that actually arises in this same place and it ceases in this same place. So there wouldn't be an attachment to that. I'm assuming that this person, this individual that is enlightened has developed themselves so much that they are continuously aware of this process. Whereas most of us might only be aware of it for a very short period of time and then we just sort of go back to the muck. But the enlightened being would be somebody that's really, it's not changing for them. They're truly in that experience of that this is how the present moment is, and this present moment is free. And that there is no identifiable self within this, that there is just this experience. And so, yeah, I again, I can only speculate that this is probably what would be. And if it is this way, it sounds great. It sounds like the thing that I myself would want to go for. If I could be in this state of realizing that true freedom is now, and now is always for us. That would be the greatest thing that I could experience. True freedom from this suffering that only ever arises now, and being free from that sounds like the greatest thing that I could experience. So I'm assuming that that's what they experience. But again, I don't really know. So we got time for one more?
Yep. Ajahn, says here, a person in my life chose to give their attention to gaming and essentially be in the online world. It's what they like, but it causes suffering for others. So how can those, so this is the next part of the question, how can those who feel the lack of attention let go of that when their needs are not being met?
When the let's call it the family or the friends, when their needs aren't being met, or when the person that's playing the games are not met? Right, yeah. It's it's a difficult one. Again, if we can recollect on what I've been talking about, this experience of consciousness, attention, and time, this is something that is so hard to recognize. And this is something that we truly don't control. So this person that is playing the game, their attention getting lost in the game, this is just how most of us are. You can't really blame this person for doing that, because this is just the way attention works. This is just the way our experience actually works. And so if we can actually realize this within ourselves, that this is how attention is, that we don't control it in any way, we can actually hopefully we can actually be more forgiving to this individual, that they're lost in some way. And we try to develop care for them, that this is somebody that is trying to seek out happiness, which is what we all do. Our attention is usually trying to find a release from suffering. That's what attention is usually moving towards. We experience some kind of suffering, so our attention tries to move to get away from that thing. And so this individual that is maybe playing a lot of games or something, in some way there's some sort of dissatisfaction, there's some sort of suffering in that person's conscious experience, and they're doing whatever they can with their attention and their time to be free of that. It might not, in your eyes, be the most, the best way to actually do that. But for this person, this is just what they have. All of us just operate out of the tools that we've sort of got in front of us. Some of us have these very useful tools, and some of us don't have good tools. And you can't blame anybody for not having those good tools. Somebody, if they don't have them, they don't have them. So we can try to be as forgiving as we possibly can to this person. We say, our needs aren't being met, but in essence, how do we actually make our needs met? We make our needs met by truly understanding what this existence actually is. And we do this by understanding our own existence and understanding that we're just like everybody else. We're just susceptible to the same things. As I said before, it's like I've rattled on about this, but I get as lost as everybody else. So me knowing that I get as lost as everybody else, this actually does, in some kind of sense, give me some compassion for others. It's like, well, they're just as lost as I am. So for somebody who is doing something that you might not think as that is useful or beneficial, and they're using their attention in this way, just remember that they're just as lost as you. They're just trying to alleviate their own suffering just as much as you, and so you can do whatever you can to actually support them. If you can help them in some way to lead a more use use their attention in a better way, then you do what you can. But then just sort of realize that this is sort of how our existence is. So hopefully sort of works out. So yeah. Okay, with that, I think I've gone a little bit over time, so I'd like to thank you all for coming. You're more than welcome to come over, and we'll do the rice pindabata today. You're all welcome to come over and have a shared meal with us today. Anything else, Jinta? Yep.
Sorry, I missed mentioning that the donations that we got at Ajahn Brahm's birthday on last Sunday, they were mostly from Hong Kong, Singapore, and Indonesia, mostly from those countries. Those are the international followers of Ajahn Brahm, the devotees of Ajahn Brahm. So that's why I mentioned that we have the honors now to fill up the balance of 140,000. So please get together and
Come on, Australia.
Make some donations. It's on BSV. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to mention that because it needs to be mentioned that most of the devotees were from Hong Kong, Singapore, and Indonesia. Thank you.